There comes a time in your life when silence becomes your strength and detachment becomes your survival. When the world around you becomes loud with blame, manipulation, and negativity, you begin to understand the real meaning of peace, not found in loud victories or endless explanations, but in the quiet decision to protect your energy. People will try to provoke you, test your patience, make you question your worth. But the true test is not how you react, it's how you rise above it. You don't need to fight every battle or respond to every wound. Sometimes your growth demands that you sit still, observe, and walk away with grace. Not because you're weak, but because you've finally realized that your inner peace is far more valuable than proving a point. Protecting your energy by choosing silence over reaction is not an act of weakness. It's an act of deep self-respect and maturity. When you are surrounded by toxic people, the temptation to defend yourself, to explain, to argue, or to seek justice can be incredibly strong. Toxic individuals often thrive on emotional reactions. They feed off your anger, your confusion, your pain. They push your buttons not because they misunderstand you, but because they want to control you. And the moment you react, they win. In that single moment of reacting, you hand over your power. You let them dictate your emotional state, and that is exactly what they want. Silence, on the other hand, is a conscious choice. It's not about being voiceless, it's about being wise. It's about realizing that not every comment deserves a reply, and not every insult deserves your attention. When you stay silent in the face of toxicity, you are not ignoring it. You are acknowledging it, understanding it, and choosing not to let it touch your inner world. You are putting a wall between yourself and the chaos, not out of fear, but out of awareness. You understand that your peace is sacred and must be guarded like a treasure. Choosing silence doesn't mean you are pretending everything is okay. It means you are learning to speak a different language, a language of self-control, a language of boundaries, a language of power that doesn't need to scream to be heard. There is strength in being able to sit with your emotions without letting them control your behavior. There is power in observing someone's attempt to trigger you and deciding not to give them what they want. You become a mirror to their intentions, not a sponge for their poison. There are moments when silence will feel unbearable, especially when your mind is screaming with things you wish you could say. You'll replay conversations in your head, think of comebacks, and wonder if you should have defended yourself louder. But you'll also realize that nothing you could have said would have changed who they are. Toxic people don't listen to understand. They listen to twist, manipulate, and blame. They aren't interested in truth. They are interested in control. When you choose silence, you take that control away from them. You confuse them. You remove their weapon. You stop the game before it even begins. There is something deeply healing about staying quiet in a moment of provocation. You'll feel the rise of emotion, rage, hurt, frustration, but then you'll feel it pass. You'll realize that you are capable of holding your ground without shouting, without tears, without breaking. Silence teaches you the value of pause. It gives you space to think clearly, to see the situation for what it really is, and in that clarity, you stop needing revenge or validation. You stop needing the toxic person to admit they were wrong. You no longer crave their understanding, because you've already understood yourself. When you choose not to react, you choose not to absorb, and what you don't absorb cannot harm you. The words, the gestures, the manipulation. They bounce off the armor of your silence. You become unshakable, not because you don't feel, but because you've learned to manage what you feel with grace. Toxic people lose their power when they realize they can't reach the part of you that stays still, centered, and untouchable. That stillness is your greatest weapon. Being silent also allows you to observe. You begin to notice patterns, see through facades, and recognize manipulation faster. You learn who truly deserves your words and who doesn't. You realize that not every situation needs your voice. Sometimes it needs your distance. Sometimes stepping back says more than stepping in. Sometimes walking away in silence is louder than 1,000 shouted truths. You stop wasting your breath on people committed to misunderstanding you. Protecting your energy becomes a lifestyle. It becomes a filter through which you measure every interaction. You begin to ask yourself, is this worth my peace? Is this person worth my emotional investment? And more often than not, you'll find that they aren't. You'll find that peace is not found in changing others, but in choosing yourself. You'll learn to live without needing to defend your worth to anyone who can't see it. You'll understand that silence isn't the absence of words, it's the presence of wisdom. Recognizing manipulation without engaging emotionally is a skill that often comes from experience, pain, and deep self-awareness. When you are around toxic people, manipulation becomes a common tool they use to control your thoughts, actions, and emotions. It doesn't always come in obvious forms like shouting or threats. Sometimes it comes wrapped in guilt, tripping, passive-aggressive comments, subtle gaslighting, or the constant shifting of blame. They make you question your own reality, your intentions, your worth, until you start wondering if maybe you are the problem. But the truth is, recognizing manipulation is the first step to breaking the cycle. And it starts with observing instead of reacting. You begin to notice patterns in how these individuals speak. They never truly apologize, they only shift responsibility. They make you feel guilty for setting boundaries. They twist your words to suit their narrative. Every time something goes wrong, somehow it becomes your fault. And if you dare to stand up for yourself, they accuse you of being too sensitive, too emotional, too dramatic. This is their strategy, and make you doubt yourself so they can maintain control. But once you start recognizing the game, you stop playing it. You no longer take the bait. When you recognize manipulation, your power lies in your ability to detach emotionally from the drama. This doesn't mean you become numb. It means you choose not to get tangled in the emotional web they try to weave. You see their words for what they are: tactics, not truths, not reflections of your value. You stop personalizing every jab, every guilt trip, every sarcastic remark. You realize that their behavior says more about them than it ever could about you. And when you stop reacting with anger or hurt, you rob them of their fuel. Emotional detachment isn't coldness, it's clarity. It allows you to respond instead of react. It gives you space between their manipulation and your peace. Instead of defending yourself against lies, you begin to accept that no explanation will ever satisfy someone who's committed to misunderstanding you. You don't need to convince them of your intentions. You don't need to explain why you said no. You simply stand firm with grace and let them sit with their discomfort. That's not cruelty, it's self-preservation. One of the most powerful things you can do is stay calm when someone is trying to provoke you. Toxic people want your reaction. They want to see you break, to prove to themselves that they still have control over you. When you stay calm, it confuses them. They can't figure out why their tactics aren't working anymore. You stop becoming predictable. You stop being their emotional puppet, and that is when you begin to regain your strength. Recognizing manipulation also teaches you to trust your instincts again. You stop ignoring the red flags. You stop justifying someone's bad behavior because of their past or your shared history. You begin to honor your own feelings and say to yourself, "This doesn't feel right," and that's enough. You don't need evidence or validation to walk away from what drains you. Your emotional peace becomes a higher priority than your loyalty to someone who hurts you. There will be moments when you'll feel the urge to argue, to prove your point, to show them the truth. But with time, you'll understand that not everyone is capable of seeing it. Some people are too invested in their own version of reality to accept anything that threatens their illusion. That's why emotional detachment is so important. It keeps you from wasting your energy on battles that don't lead to healing, only more damage. You also start noticing how your body responds to manipulation. The tightness in your chest, the anxiety in your stomach, the exhaustion after every interaction. Your body often speaks before your mind can fully grasp what's happening. When you tune into these signals, you gain an early warning system. You can remove yourself from toxic situations before they escalate. You learn that walking away is not weakness, it's wisdom. Emotional detachment doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop sacrificing your mental health for the sake of keeping someone else comfortable. You learn to love from a distance. You learn to support without losing yourself. You learn that sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do for yourself and others is to step back and let people face the consequences of their actions without you constantly trying to fix or explain everything. Recognizing manipulation empowers you to protect your emotional space. You build a life that doesn't revolve around walking on eggshells. You cultivate relationships based on respect, not control. And in the process, you begin to heal parts of yourself that were once shaped by fear and doubt. Setting strong boundaries without guilt or explanation is one of the most powerful forms of self-respect. When you're around toxic people, boundaries become more than just emotional lines, they become lifelines. Toxic individuals often see boundaries as threats. They aren't used to hearing no, especially from someone they once manipulated or controlled. So, the moment you begin to enforce limits, they will try to make you feel guilty, selfish, or even cruel. But boundaries are not walls to keep people out. They are doors to protect what's inside. They are the way you communicate your worth, your limits, and your capacity. In toxic relationships, the lines often get blurred. You're expected to be available all the time. Your kindness gets mistaken for weakness. Your silence gets interpreted as approval. Your empathy becomes a tool they use to bend you. Slowly, you begin to shrink in order to keep the peace. You start compromising parts of yourself just to avoid conflict. You tolerate things that go against your values, your well-being, your emotional safety. But eventually, there comes a moment when you realize you can't keep setting yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. That moment becomes your turning point. When you begin to set boundaries, it's uncomfortable, not just for them, but for you. You've been conditioned to believe that saying no means you don't care. You've been made to feel responsible for other people's emotions. So when you finally start choosing yourself, you might hear voices in your head whispering doubt. But that discomfort is not a sign you're doing something wrong. It's a sign you're breaking a pattern. And patterns don't break without resistance. Every time you say, "I'm not available for this conversation right now," or "this behavior is not acceptable," you're retraining your nervous system to understand that you are safe when you stand up for yourself. The beauty of strong boundaries is that they don't require explanations. You don't owe anyone a long justification for choosing your peace. Toxic people will demand reasons, trying to poke holes in your decision. They'll ask you to defend your limits as if your well-being is up for debate. But your boundary is the reason. Your mental health, your clarity, your energy, that is enough. You are allowed to say no simply because you choose to. You are allowed to distance yourself without offering an emotional breakdown as evidence. You are allowed to protect your space without guilt. It's important to understand that people who get angry at your boundaries are the ones who benefited from you having none. They are the ones who counted on your silence, your compliance, your fear of losing them. When you change the rules, they will resist. They will test your firmness. They might even escalate their behavior to break through. But that is not a sign to bend. That is a sign you're finally being heard. Boundaries shake the foundation of a toxic dynamic because they introduce something unfamiliar, accountability. As you continue to build boundaries, you start to notice how your life shifts. You feel lighter, conversations become clearer, your time feels like yours again. You stop apologizing for protecting your peace. You stop explaining why you're unavailable. You stop accepting disrespect disguised as love. And you start attracting relationships that honor your space, your voice, your truth. You begin to realize that boundaries don't push the right people away. They filter them in. The people who truly care about you will respect your limits without needing an explanation. They will honor your space because they understand the value of emotional safety. It also becomes clear that setting boundaries is an ongoing process, not a one-time decision. Toxic people may keep testing the waters, hoping your strength was temporary. But every time you reinforce your boundary, you're not just protecting yourself, you're also teaching yourself that you are worthy of respect. You are worthy of rest. You are worthy of being seen, not used. And that message, repeated over time, begins to heal the parts of you that once believed otherwise. Eventually, you stop feeling guilty for choosing yourself. You stop feeling the need to soften your no or sugarcoat your limit. You realize that being kind and being firm can coexist. That compassion doesn't mean self-abandonment. That love doesn't mean tolerating toxicity. You don't need to become hard or unfeeling to have strong boundaries. You just need to become clear. Clear about who you are, clear about what you accept, clear about the fact that your life is not a space for emotional chaos. It is a space for growth, peace, and truth. Detaching with dignity, not bitterness, is one of the most powerful decisions you can make when dealing with toxic people. It doesn't mean you stop caring or that the pain never existed. It means you've chosen to rise above the chaos and protect your heart without allowing it to become hardened. Toxic individuals will often leave behind deep emotional wounds, betrayal, manipulation, disrespect, constant invalidation. And yet, the most powerful healing doesn't come from revenge, confrontation, or proving your point. It comes from choosing to let go with grace, choosing peace over resentment, and choosing to move forward without dragging the weight of bitterness behind you. Bitterness is heavy. It consumes your thoughts, changes your tone, and alters your energy. It holds you hostage to past wounds, constantly reopening old emotional cuts. When you walk around with bitterness, you're still emotionally entangled with the person who hurt you. You may no longer speak to them, but in your mind they still have power. They still control your mood, your thoughts, your sense of justice. That's why detachment is necessary. Not just to distance yourself physically, but to cut the invisible cords that keep pulling you back into the same emotional cycle. Detachment with dignity is a quiet strength. It's not about slamming doors or making dramatic exits. It's about quietly deciding that your energy, your peace, your sanity are not up for negotiation anymore. It's choosing not to match their chaos. It's walking away when everything inside you wants to scream, but you know that silence is the real power. You don't need to humiliate someone to prove that you're done. You don't need to explain yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. Your detachment is the message. Your calm is your closure. There is a sacred kind of power in keeping your heart soft while creating distance. You don't let their toxicity turn you into someone you're not. You don't adopt their cruelty as a defense mechanism. You understand that healing isn't about becoming colder. It's about becoming wiser. You learn how to protect your space without building walls so high that even love can't enter. You give yourself permission to detach, not because you hate them, but because you love yourself enough to stop bleeding for someone who never deserved your sacrifice. Often, toxic people will try to re-enter your life when they notice you've withdrawn your emotional investment. They'll try to provoke you guilt, trip you, or test your boundaries just to see if they still have access to you. That's when dignity becomes your shield. You don't respond with anger or revenge. You don't get pulled back into proving your worth. You simply don't engage. You stay grounded in the truth that not everyone deserves a front row seat in your life. Some people only showed up to drain your light, not to share it. Detaching with dignity also means releasing the need for closure from the other person. You realize that waiting for an apology or explanation is a trap that keeps you emotionally stuck. You may never hear the words, "I'm sorry." You may never get an acknowledgement of the harm they caused. But you also realize you don't need it anymore. Your peace does not depend on their remorse. You choose to forgive not for them, but for yourself. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or allowing them back in. It means refusing to let their behavior poison your spirit any longer. As you practice detachment, you begin to reclaim your power. You find joy in things that once felt numb. You stop obsessing over what they're doing or who they're with. You stop reliving old arguments in your mind. You become more present. You start reconnecting with the parts of yourself that were buried under years of emotional survival. You start choosing relationships that feel safe, nurturing, and balanced. You begin to live from a place of intention rather than reaction. And in that space you grow, not in spite of what happened, but because you chose to rise from it without bitterness. This kind of emotional maturity doesn't happen overnight. It's a process of unlearning, healing, and relearning what self-respect looks like. There will be days when the anger resurfaces, when the pain knocks on your heart again. But every time you choose not to feed the bitterness, you're taking back your power. You're reminding yourself that your story is not defined by who hurt you, but by how you chose to heal. You are not their victim. You are your own rescue, and your dignity is the quiet proof that you never needed to sink to their level to find your peace. Focusing on your inner healing, not external validation, is one of the most transformative journeys you can take, especially after enduring toxic relationships or environment. Toxic people often make you feel like you're never enough. No matter how much you give, how much you explain, how much you try to please, it's never quite right. You find yourself constantly seeking approval, craving a word of acknowledgement, hoping they'll finally see your worth. But external validation from someone who's emotionally manipulative or unavailable becomes a prison. The more you chase it, the more you lose yourself. Healing begins the moment you decide to turn inward. It starts when you stop asking, "What did I do wrong?" and begin asking, "What parts of me need care, attention, and love?" You shift the focus from trying to fix what others think about you to fixing what you feel about yourself. Inner healing requires honesty. It demands that you sit with the discomfort, the wounds, the patterns you've inherited or developed over time. It means facing truths you've avoided, like the fact that you've been putting other people's needs above your own just to feel accepted. One of the first signs of healing is realizing you don't need to explain yourself to be worthy. You don't need someone to clap for your progress or approve of your choices. The world may not always see your quiet growth, but that doesn't make it any less powerful. You learn to become your own source of validation. You begin to celebrate your boundaries, your self-respect, your decisions, even when no one else does. This shift is liberating because it removes your emotional well-being from the hands of people who once had the power to break you. Inner healing also teaches you to forgive yourself, not for what happened, but for the times you stayed too long, gave too much, or abandoned your own needs. You begin to understand that your worth was never tied to how others treated you. It was always there, just buried under years of conditioning. As you heal, you stop looking outward for love and start generating it from within. You learn to sit with your pain without judging it. You hold space for your emotions instead of pushing them away. You begin to treat yourself with the kindness you once gave to people who didn't deserve it. This process is not linear. Some days you'll feel strong, confident, and grounded. Other days you'll question everything. Healing isn't about being perfect, it's about being real. It's about noticing the small shifts, how you no longer tolerate disrespect, how your anxiety lessens around certain people, how you no longer feel the need to over-explain. These are the silent victories that no one may see, but you feel them deeply. And those moments matter more than any praise from someone who once made you feel small. When you focus on inner healing, you start to redefine success. It's no longer about being liked or accepted by everyone. It's about being aligned with your truth. You no longer sacrifice your peace just to avoid being misunderstood. You become okay with people not getting the full story, because you know the version you carry in your heart is enough. You realize that healing doesn't require an audience. It requires courage, patience, and a commitment to becoming whole, even if no one else sees the work you're doing. External validation becomes less important because you start validating yourself. You speak gently to yourself. You remind yourself of how far you've come. You build a relationship with the voice inside your head, the one that was once filled with doubt, fear, and insecurity, and begin turning it into a voice of compassion, support, and strength. You stop comparing your journey to others. You stop seeking approval from people who don't even understand your story. You begin to live for yourself. This kind of healing also changes the way you connect with others. You begin to attract different energy. people who see you, respect you, and meet you where you are. Not because you begged for it, but because your healed energy no longer entertains disrespect. You're no longer trying to prove your worth. You've become someone who knows it. You've built a home within yourself so solid that the storms outside no longer shake your foundation, and that selfish assurance becomes your anchor. Inner healing is a commitment you make to yourself every single day. It's the decision to rise even when no one's watching. It's the quiet, sacred work of choosing yourself over and over again. It's not glamorous or loud, but it's real and it's lasting. It's the kind of work that can't be seen in photos or praised in public, but it radiates in your peace, your presence, and your power. Walking away when peace costs too much is a decision that doesn't come easily, especially for someone who has a compassionate heart and a loyal spirit. You try to fix things, to understand the pain behind someone's toxicity, to offer them grace even when they keep crossing the line. You hold on, hoping they will change, that maybe your love or patience will soften them, that somehow the relationship can be healed if you just try a little harder. But eventually, you reach a breaking point where you realize that your peace is too valuable and no connection, no matter how deep or long, lasting, is worth losing yourself over. There comes a time when the noise around you begins to drown out the voice within you. You feel the tension in your body, the anxiety in your chest, the emotional fatigue that never seems to leave. You notice how conversations that used to feel normal now drain your energy. You start anticipating the next argument, the next manipulation, the next emotional roller coaster. You walk on eggshells, choosing your words carefully, not out of respect, but out of fear of the reaction they might trigger. That's not love, that's survival, and peace should never be something you have to fight for in a relationship. When you walk away from a toxic person, it doesn't mean you're giving up on them. It means you're choosing not to give up on yourself. It's understanding that no amount of effort can change someone who is committed to misunderstanding you. It's realizing that your presence should never come at the cost of your emotional safety. You can care deeply for someone and still acknowledge that they're not healthy for you. You can have history with someone and still choose not to carry that weight into your future. People often confuse endurance with strength, but real strength lies in knowing when to stop. It takes courage to walk away from something that once meant everything. It takes clarity to see that peace is not found in the constant need to fix, prove, or plead. It takes self-respect to say, "This is no longer serving me and I deserve more." Walking away is not a betrayal. It's an act of self-preservation. It's you reclaiming your time, your worth, your future. It's choosing to stop setting yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. You begin to understand that loving someone doesn't mean sacrificing your inner peace. You can still hold space for compassion without allowing chaos into your life. You can forgive someone without allowing them back in. You can wish someone healing and still protect yourself from the storm they carry. Detaching doesn't mean you're heartless. It means you've finally understood the value of protecting your own heart. Walking away is also an act of faith. You may not know exactly what lies ahead, but you trust that it has to be better than the cycle you're leaving behind. You trust that the emptiness you might feel in the beginning is temporary, but the peace you gain will be permanent. You allow yourself to grieve, not just the person, but the version of yourself that tolerated what you didn't deserve. You mourn the lost time, the broken trust, the emotional weight. And then, slowly, you begin to feel lighter. You start to breathe again. You start to hear your own thoughts again. The journey doesn't end the moment you walk away. In fact, that's where the healing begins. You'll have days where you question your decision, where the silence feels too loud, where memories pull you back into doubt. But you remind yourself of how far you've come. You remind yourself of the nights you cried yourself to sleep, the times you bent until you broke, the parts of yourself you lost trying to make someone else whole. And then you remember why you left, not because you stopped loving them, but because you started loving yourself. Peace becomes your new standard. You stop entertaining conversations that make you feel small. You stop explaining your boundaries to people who keep crossing them. You stop giving second chances to patterns that keep repeating. You surround yourself with energy that feels safe, nurturing, and respectful. And in doing so, you redefine your life, not by the pain you escaped, but by the peace you chose. You start to build a reality that doesn't rely on fixing others, but on healing yourself. You make space for the love, the clarity, and the calm that you always deserved.